CYMPO Technical Advisory Committee meeting to order. So we've got, and I'll go ahead and read this, Title VI Policy and Meeting Procedures.
I'm sorry,
CYMPO
Mr.
complies
Chairman.
with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of
Frank.
1964 and related non-discrimination statutes and regulations in all programs. Oh, yes.
We need to, Allison needs to do a roll call, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I was thinking that was after this. So,
Sorry.
well, then we'll let her read too, because I'm seeing my connections unstable. So,
Okay, sounds good.
so yeah, if I could have roll.
Sure. Chairman Marbury, present.
Present.
Vice Chair Davis.
Present.
Member Hughes. Absent. Member Mattingly.
Here.
Member Cherry.
I'm here.
Member Latier is absent. Member Bondoc.
Here.
The Prescott National Forest seat is vacant, but we still have a quorum.
And then Allison, will you read the Title VI, please?
Sure. CYMPO complies with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and related non-discrimination statutes and regulations in all programs and activities. Members of the public may review the CYMPO Title VI plan and submit a self-identification survey by accessing the CYMPO website. As a reminder to those attending the meeting, please keep your line on mute until you wish to speak. This meeting is available for public viewing on the CYMPO YouTube page.
Okay, give me just 1 minute here. Okay, I think I'm on phone now, Vinny.
All right, sounds good. You're coming out clear to us. All right, sounds good. You're coming out clear to us. There's an echo, so be sure you mute your computer.
Yep, working on it. There we go. That should have me. All right. Sorry for the technical issues. All right, so next item is call to the public. I'll read this. This item is to provide an opportunity for presentations of comments by the public on subjects not on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the board need not request permission in advance and are limited to 3 minutes for the virtual meeting. For all those attendees wishing to participate, you can use the raise my hand feature, then Allison can go through and pick those as they come through, and we can hear it that way. So Allison, is there anyone wishing to speak?
Mr. Chair, not at this time.
Okay. All right. So for that right now, we'll move on. Item 4, consideration and possible action to approve the October 20th, 2021 special meeting minutes of the Technical Advisory Committee. Has everyone read the minutes, and are there any comments or corrections?
Mr. Chair, I have reviewed the minutes and have no recommended corrections at this time, and would be happy to make a motion to approve the minutes from the October 20th, 2021 special meeting for the Technical Advisory Committee of CYMPO.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. I have a motion by Member Cherry and a second by Vice Chair Davis. So call for a vote. All those in favor, respond by saying aye or yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Right, so that takes us to item 5. Review, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval to apply for the 535E Transit Planning Grant Fund. Vinny, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the TAC. Excuse me. We were provided a notice of funding of availability from the Arizona Department of Transportation, or ADOT. This happens on most years, and what happens is, as ADOT, goes through their various funding, and especially for transit, there are some additional transit dollars that become available for planning purposes, which is what has happened this year. So they've issued a notice of available funding in the amount of $400,000 for the state of Arizona. MPOs and COGs are eligible for this planning funds. And working with you in the past, we look for any opportunity we can to bring in some additional dollars to support the vision and mission and priorities of the CYMPO region. So with that said, we do have a little bit of a tight window we're working within than probably most grants when they issue this. So applications are fairly simple on this particular application, but they are due December the 16th, and there is an executive board meeting the day before on the 15th. I have provided in your packet some of the details as it relates to this notice of available funding. What I'd like to do is invite Kimberly Blanco, our transit planner, to go ahead and discuss that we've been visiting with the town of Prescott Valley with the transit manager, Pedro Rodriguez, with Yavapai Regional Transit, and really attempting to find out, what are some additional planning that we could provide support for as the region moves forward. So Kimberly, if you want to talk a little bit about what we've identified in those discussions, and then I can kind of wrap it up in our opportunities to move forward and answer any questions.
Yes, awesome, thank you. So we did speak with Pedro first with the town of Prescott Valley, and he said that he found it most beneficial if we could do some assistance with the marketing plan aspect. So as you all know, the microtransit system is set to launch in June of next year. And so to help with this and the success, we would like to do a marketing transit plan, but we want it to be regional to also include benefits for Yavapai Regional Transit. They currently have a marketing plan, and they found that it would be beneficial to see if there could be any updates. And for this to be regional, they want within the scope, which we have not created yet, we would like to identify the consultant to address Prescott Valley, Prescott, and Chino Valley, because they are unique and in different maturity of transit systems. And so that was what we had discussed and what they agreed on and would like to have some more support in. For this plan, we are thinking about asking between, I believe, around $75,000 to do this marketing plan. We do have the option to submit a separate application as well, and that would be an active transportation plan, which was also discussed with the town of Prescott Valley and others, that would be beneficial. Active transportation plans review and assess sidewalks and trails. So it would be the walkability and bicycling network through the CYMPO region that also helps with the transit and other modes of circulation. And for that one, it would be around $100,000 to $125,000 for an ask through this grant to complete that type of plan. We would prioritize the marketing plan, and that would be indicated in the grant, and they are separate. So we would want to prioritize receiving the funds for the transit marketing plan.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate that. So again, moving forward, it's as with all competitive grants, it's hard to gauge, what our competition looks like out there. I've had the opportunity to visit with a few MPOs and COGs. Excuse me, I've had the opportunity to visit with a few MPOs and COGs. So some of them that I've spoke to are not pursuing it, and a few are. So we're trying to coordinate as best we can. I would say moving forward, the best opportunity is this marketing plan. As Kimberly indicated, it's definitely not a one size fits all. The regions, as she indicated, is in various stages. You look at Yavapai Regional Transit, that's a rural established transit system. Town of Prescott Valley is at the very initial steps of attempting to get established and set up. And then City of Prescott really hasn't come on board yet. So we see opportunity to engage all three communities, but very differently. She mentioned that Yavapai Regional Transit is operating under a marketing plan or engagement plan that's the last one's 2015. And then this will give us an opportunity to update it. We met with them yesterday. They're definitely in support. And then again, with the town of Prescott Valley to really set up for success, the work that they're in the process of doing. Regarding the active transportation plan, I would say it's a bit of a stretch looking at maybe what others might be applying for, but again, it's an opportunity to look at our bicycle pedestrian planning in the region, and again, to be able to draw down these funds. So with that said, happy to answer any questions, but we would like to get your support in moving forward and applying for these funds.
Mr. Chair, I am happy to make a motion if you're entertaining one. Can't hear you, Frank.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. So if there's no questions or comments, we'll go ahead and entertain the motion, Member Cherry.
Well, I'll make a motion to recommend the executive board approve applying for 5305E transit planning grant funds. Just a slight bit of discussion. I'm pleased to hear that Vinny's been talking with other COGs and MPOs around the state to kind of parse this out accordingly. That seems reasonable, and get a little marketing going in advance of the microtransit system starting up in Prescott Valley sounds outstanding, and let's take advantage of it if we can get some of it. So thank you.
I'll second the motion. Norm Davis.
So a motion by Member Cherry and a second by Vice Chair Davis. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for vote. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Right. The motion carries. So thank you for that. I think that takes us to item 6. Review, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval for the scope of work for the Sundog Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview, or the Corridor Planning Study. Vinny, if I could ask you, before you begin too much, just maybe refresh me and explain to maybe those listening the administrative differences between 6 and 7 as we get going too, because they seem so similar. Maybe.
You bet. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the TAC, and I'll ask Daniel to chime in just a few minutes to help out with this also. But we did put down essentially 2 items. Item number 6 is to help us to really focus in on the scope of the design concept report and environmental overview, or the corridor planning study. And then number 7, and I know this is adding confusion, they're definitely both tied together. We almost grouped it as one, but really seemed even more confusing. Essentially, item number 7 is the action to move forward with one or the other, being the request for proposal, or I'm sorry, the request for quotes, or RFQ, is the design concept report and environmental overview, or the request for proposals, or RFP, is the corridor planning study. And I hope we don't, interchange those too much throughout the meeting and cause confusion. But, since the last meeting, which I asked you to table this particular item, these are some of the things that we've been able to work out with the Federal Highway Administration and the Arizona Department of Transportation and Myrna's on the line too. She was part of helping us out along with other staff members. But we needed to be clear as to what needed to be called an RFQ, what needed to be called an RFP. And we've gone through, several variations of different titles. And probably over the last month, maybe different people have heard, terms like feasibility studies and corridor studies and so forth. So terminology is important, but it really drills down to what is allowed expenses from the monies that we receive from federal highways. So what you have today is we're going to start by looking at the scope. One of the main things that was brought up last time, which led to the tabling of this, was one of the comments that was made from the CYMPO executive board was the discussion about a 10-year construction clock. And I know many of you are familiar with that, but maybe there's some in the public that aren't as familiar with that. And the 10-year construction clock would relate to the use of CYMPO's funding, which is all federal funding. And depending on what the project is, we'll use the RFQ or the design concept report, something like that, using the federal funding that CYMPO has, would then initiate a 10-year construction clock. The CYMPO board made some comments to that could be a pro and it could be a con. And because of that, it was staff's responsibility to follow up with that, to bring information back to you all. We're still waiting on a couple things from federal highways, because looking at this as this project moves forward, whether CYMPO is involved or not, there's definitely plans in place for segments of Sundog Connector, such as in the Storm Ranch area and the Yavapai Hills development. So my communication currently out to federal highways and those that can respond is, what checks that box of the 10-year construction clock, because segments of this will be developed sometime over the next 10 years. So in some ways, I'd like to think, even though that's been a part of our discussion, that's going to be taken care of. I did have our legal counsel also look into it, and unfortunately the language is not black and white. So all that to say, we're still waiting on some additional confirmation about that 10-year construction clock. But what you are being presented with today is really looking at the technical aspects of the scope, and then looking for a recommendation from you to be able to take this on to the executive board. But you do have, again, a design concept report, or you have a corridor planning study. With that said, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have Daniel go ahead and walk you through the difference of the two. You do have a foundation of familiarity with both of these. You've been looking at both of them. What we've continued to do, though, is in working with federal highways and ADOT, continue to clean them up so that, again, both of these are meeting what is an allowed use for these different types of studies. So Daniel, if you want to come on in, please.
Yes, thank you, Vinny.
Real quick, Daniel, before you get started, I just want to procedurally, I'm understanding there might be some folks from the public wishing to comment. So what we'll do is go through the introductions and have the panelist discussion of the TAC members. And then at that time, I'll probably open it up for some public comments if they wish to talk at that time before we make any motions. So just a heads up there, if anyone from the attendees of the public are wishing to comment, I intend to allow some opportunity for that, and I'll have a few comments about what to expect for those comments at that time as well.
Thank you, Frank. As Vinny mentioned, that we have been going back and forth with both these scopes, the design concept report and environmental overview, and the corridor planning study. Today, I want to kind of share my screen, and I've highlighted everything that's different between the DCR and the corridor planning study. So the one up on my screen is a design concept report. To be pretty similar to what you've seen in the past. So the things that are different between the two scopes of work that's not included in the corridor planning study is geotech overview. With discussions with federal highways and ADOT, we weren't sure if this was going to be preliminary engineering, so we pulled it from the corridor planning study just because of the unknowns. Drainage report is another big one that's also preliminary engineering. More detailed utility work throughout the DCR. The biggest one is a 15% engineering scoping design for the preferred alternative. That was something we definitely could not have with the corridor planning study. We would just have conceptual designs or conceptual plans. And then a couple of the, obviously in the cost, we'll be getting engineering design, deliverables, we're getting our full DCR, standalone reports, we'll be getting our drainage report. And then, like I said, 15% designs, which will also help us move forward with a design following completion of the design concept report, if we went that route. Do you have any further input on that, Vinny?
No, I think I'm okay on that right now. Thank you.
I got a quick question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
I did see we had at least one question from a member of the public, and I think it's a good question, and that is item 1 here talks about assessing the alternatives that came from the PARA study in 2013. And I think we're all on board with the fact that there will be, to some degree, some assessment of the alternatives once again, now that we're here 8 years later, coming up on 9 years later. However, we also don't necessarily want to completely reinvent the wheel, and there were some valid reasons why certain alternatives were disregarded before. So perhaps you can speak to that briefly, Daniel, as to item 1 and the sub items underneath that.
Sure. So yes, back in the 2013 study, there were a couple alternatives that were thrown out due to terrain and cost. With either the DCR or the corridor planning study, the consultant, whoever is selected, will be reviewing past alternatives and any new alternatives that are identified throughout this study as well. One other thing that we had added in was identifying intersection locations for the preferred alternative throughout the study area. So from Prescott Lakes Parkway into Prescott Valley. So identifying locations for Diamond Valley, Yavapai Hills, and things like that. So what the best connections would be.
And just to follow up, I do think that there is some platting that's already occurred in Storm Ranch that has kind of identified the location of the right-of-way for this. Is that correct?
Vinny, can you answer that one?
You bet. And Ian's on the phone too. Ian can chime in on this too. So yes, Storm Ranch has a plat, has received or has already been approved by the city of Prescott. And I always forget, but I do believe, Ian, it's the first, is it quarter mile or half mile beyond the roundabout intersection with Prescott Lakes Parkway. Ian, are you there? And then the other part, maybe while Ian, give him a minute, but then again, Yavapai Hills too. To the best of my knowledge, the city has received a plat for that area that is to be developed. What's left to be developed in Yavapai Hills, which again includes another segment of Sundog Connector Road in that particular development. So to your point, Dan, yeah, there are segments, and there's Ian.
Can you? Yeah. So I was going to say, I think it's about 3,000 to 3,500 feet of Storm Ranch is already platted and has engineering plans. So, you know, the design is basically done in those areas. And then there's a section through Yavapai Hills that basically is at least reserved with right of way. So those sections are pretty much set because of that. And so while, you know, an alternative analysis or another cursory look at it, it's not really going to change certain sections of what's already happening on the west, for sure.
Thank you, Ian. Dan, did that answer your questions?
It did. I just wanted to ask those for clarification, primarily for members of the public here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. And Daniel, were you done on your part?
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, members of the TAC, and maybe just another piece, Mr. Chairman, again, this takes us back to where this started with the strategic planning retreat with the CYMPO executive board, you as a TAC and staff in the room looking at the projects for the next 5 years. What's been talked about then and since then is that Sundog Connector remains a regional possible project. I had talked with the city of Prescott when I met with them a few weeks ago, and the planning staff indicated that it's been in their general plan, I think, since the mid to late 90s, and each of the general plans following since then. The 2013 corridor study also references the various regional transportation plans that Sundog Connector has been a part of. And I've had the opportunity to be able to check in with the town of Prescott Valley, the city of Prescott in Yavapai County, both staff and elected officials on this particular project as we move forward, continuing to, again, understand the consensus that we achieved at the strategic retreat and attempting to move forward. Just probably is good to repeat, there are no construction dollars that have been identified for this project. There are definitely many moving pieces to this, as we're aware of, both with public and private, then the local government agency. So this short 4 mile or less road, you know, goes through state trust land, through Yavapai County, town of Prescott Valley, city of Prescott. So what CYMPO's role is to try and facilitate those moving pieces in a planning process. The design concept report was the recommendation of the next step of the 2013 study that was done by the city of Prescott. So all that to say, following the various general plans, the transportation plans, we're attempting to take the next planning step possible. Staff is recommending the design concept report to you, and if you recommend that on to the board, again, that'll be our recommendation. The corridor planning study will get us additional information, but does not progress this project significantly like a design concept report and as what was recommended in the 2013 study. So with that said, we're happy to take questions and comments from you as a TAC.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, you may.
First off, I would imagine Allison appreciates this procedurally. I know Vice Chair Davis had to leave. He said that at the beginning, but we've also had John Latier join, who is a TAC member. So I think we're still at 5 members present, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Thank you.
All right, you bet. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, what the goals are here of CYMPO relative to this corridor. You know, we're faced here with 2 pretty, I'd say, significant differences in the paths forward, the DCR and the corridor planning study. I can't help but feel like the corridor planning study has already been done with the PARA study. You know, it might have a little bit of a refresh to it to some degree or other, but it doesn't get us any closer to this even, having the possibility of funding sought for it is my concern. The 15% level construction plans, along with some geotech, drainage obviously comes into developing 15% plans. I think all that is important if, we happen to try to position one of our agencies or CYMPO to seek out some federal dollars that could help supplement with the private dollars that will undoubtedly be moving into this project via Storm Ranch and Yavapai Hills. And my feeling is there's risk in starting the 10-year clock on construction of this, but as Mr. Gallegos has already pointed out, it's likely that at least half or so of this corridor will be constructed as associated with the two aforementioned subdivisions. And I think there's a strong case that could be made that if we do some planning efforts up front now, that will qualify as some efforts on the construction window. The absolute worst case scenario is we have a good document in place, a strong cost estimate in place at the conclusion of a DCR, and we have to pay back via some mechanism if Federal Highways or U.S. Department of Transportation rules that we haven't done what is expected of CYMPO. It's not like we're getting, nothing out of this at that stage. So I'm in support of moving forward with the DCR as a logical next step. It follows in line with what the PARO study proposed. It follows in line with what the Regional Transportation Plan proposed. And I think that we would be doing the region a disservice to just kind of replow an old field with a corridor planning study. So that's my opinion, and I certainly welcome discussion from other agencies on this.
Chairman Marbury, Ian, City of Prescott.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, I seem to have lost my internet connection, but I still have my phone connection. So go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what Dan said. I certainly think that there's just a lack of value in updating the planning study to, in the secondary concept. I really think we do need to move on to the DCR at this point. I know that with the development of the Storm Ranch and then future development of Yavapai Hills, we already have issues regarding what we're going to do with utilities and looping of our water line system and some of the sewer systems to make those things complete. And that will require us to have a detailed location for the roadway to the west, just to set our utilities and some of those things in place. And so I think the DCR gets us a lot of those things, and we can really look into the finer details of the elevations and the alignments and things. And while there is that small risk of the 10-year clock, I agree that we should have that next piece ready to go so that we can pursue funding if it ever does become available. We don't have a timeline for any of this stuff. Nothing's funded at this point, but it's City of Prescott staff's opinion that the DCR is the logical next step. And so we support that as well.
And Ian, if I may, in conclusion of your comments, I would also point out that there has been some discussion about the possibility of whether this one-time funding that the RTAC is pushing forth at the state legislature level. We've kind of earmarked about $500,000. Now, obviously, we're counting chickens a little early here. But if that were to come through, it likely would be available at the beginning of our next fiscal year, which would be July 22 or thereabouts. And it's not out of the question that if this were to lag just a little bit, that by the time we were paying the first invoices for a DCR, the board, the executive board can certainly consider paying out of that funding that we had earmarked, ideally for construction, but maybe to protect ourselves for the 10-year clock, we could consider using those state dollars if they are to come. So that's a long way of saying that we have options for us with regards to how to fund this DCR. I think we should move forward with the identified federal funding as our MTIP indicates, but maybe we can shift gears a little bit, if you will, come spring, depending on what kind of feedback we've had from our legislature.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion? Okay. And as I can't see anything right now, Allison, is there any members of the public wishing to speak at this time?
I do see one raised hand. Dan Pridgick.
Okay. So at this time, we'll take public comments. We'll limit the comments to 3 minutes, just like the call to the public. And I do want to maybe preface this by saying if multiple people want to comment and the first person's already mentioned maybe a concern or a suggestion, and they feel the same way, just say, I agree with them, and that might help move things along. And also just remember that the CYMPO body is a planning organization for how to spend federal transportation dollars and coordinate planning activities. We're not the agency that determines where to put subdivisions and that sort of thing. That's up to the individual municipalities and their planning and elected bodies. So with that, and if you have constructive criticism, that would also be helpful for the executive board to hear maybe suggestions of alternatives and things like that. So Allison, if you could go ahead and bring that first person up and start a timer for 3 minutes.
Sure.
I'm still trying to reconnect.
Mr. Pridgick, you are unmuted on our end. We can't hear you. You may still be muted on your end.
Okay. So still nothing, Allison?
No, still nothing.
Okay. Well, I hate to put it on the executive board. I don't know if they'll take public comments on this. Okay, he's having trouble getting unmuted. And Mr. Pridgick, maybe one suggestion is if you have something you could type into the chat, if you have a quick comment or question. Okay. Well,
Frank looks like he just stated that he'd like to have the public involved with the consultant on the design concept report. And I certainly think that's an expectation as part of that process.
Mr. Chair and Member Cherry and members of the TAC and Dan, yeah, if I can respond to that, absolutely. And that's a good time to remind. I know we've mentioned it a few times, but I'd like to remind again, maybe some of the timeline So at this time, if the board approves, we would issue out the request for quotes after their December 15th meeting. We would give consultants about a month to review that request and then submit their proposal. With all the various steps, I would expect a consultant to come on board March or April officially. And then we would be looking at a 12 to 18 month planning process of that design concept report. In that 12 to 18 months, in a traditional design concept report and planning efforts, absolutely. There are several points of engagement, formal points of engagement. I would encourage that public comment is always received, but we will be organizing several presentations in the Yavapai Hills community and throughout the region for various presentations of public comment. So we want to absolutely emphasize that, show that both the design concept report and planning study will have that. The design concept report will have more as there's more elements to it, but various stages along the way. The public engagement will be a very key part of the design concept report. We had the opportunity, there was a meeting with the Yavapai Hills Homeowners Association where Mayor Phil Good participated, myself, the city manager, City of Prescott Public Works Director, and the fire chief. And we were able to talk about, many aspects or many concerns about this project. Some things that came up, if you will, were lighting, sound, location, various things like that. All those things are part of the design concept report process that we want the public to be engaged in, be discussing and working with the consultant to help understand the issues and what some of those possible responses might be in the area. So I hope that helps out a little bit. And sorry about the technology, Dan, that's not working for you.
And I'll just add it, Vinny, I think you may have touched on it, but with some of the recent public involvements we've had in other plans and documents, some of the virtual responses, the websites where you can put a pin on the map and voice concerns and things seem to be very effective and allow more participation than just coming to public meetings. So I think we'll be looking for that as well. It's already in the scope for virtual options. So that should be an effective tool that's becoming more and more used these days.
That's a good point, Mr. Chair. And I would absolutely say if you look at, the 2013 meeting that took place, there was 2 in-person meetings. Around 200 people participated in those particular meetings. And what I would say is, again, we'd be looking for that and more. What you bring to the attention of this is the technology that has taken place over the last decade, which I would hope, again, increases the public engagement. So we want to offer, what to meet the people where they're at. So obviously we will have in-person various times of day to try and get, again, the widest possible engagement. And then the other aspect is, again, the opportunity of public engagement, websites, social media, ways that people are able to participate virtually and or in person. And then, as you said, be able to provide their feedback and comments. And I think many of the technical people on there have used that in their recent studies, and that absolutely increases the engagement. I think I saw one other chat. I think Ann Friday was mentioned that the public was not invited to the Yavapai Hills meeting, and it was very poorly noticed to the Yavapai Hills residents. Wider notification next time is needed. Absolutely would agree. And to increase notification on all meetings, I would say the Mayor Phil Good was the one that wanted us to wanted the city manager and myself and staff to start with the group of the homeowners association to be able to start the discussion, and then be able to kind of gauge what some opportunities for public engagement after that. One of the challenges, maybe to Ann and the TAC, is the only information that we're working off of as a staff is the 2013 study information. So, the city of Prescott conducted that study, and many of us have looked through it several times again recently, but we don't have newer information, and the newer information will come out of this design concept report. So, between now and getting a consultant on board, we're still working off that 2013 study, but absolutely we're committed to more meetings, especially once the process formally gets started, and greater notification. So my apologies. John Latier wrote in the chat box, maybe review item number 8 in the DCR scope. John, I believe that was referring to the public engagement part. And if Daniel, if you wanted to mention that again, would be helpful.
I can share my screen. I think you covered just about everything in that item as well, but so it's right here. It's item number 8. So between like what Frank mentioned was the online options, in-person meetings, virtual or in person, depending on what happens, but and everything that was discussed today, that'll all be included for public engagement throughout the duration of the design concept report.
And if I could add on that, Mr. Chair and members of the TAC and the public, just maybe more for the public than anything, know that this scope is the areas that we want a consultant to come back and make a proposal on. So maybe for some of the public, this might seem a little too generic, and you want to see a lot more details to it. What I would encourage is that's part of this process, that we're issuing out some of these areas that we want focus in on, and what'll take place is the consultant will come back with some of those specifics and say, based upon these areas of emphasis, here's what we propose. We propose that you have, and again, I'm just going to use a rough number, so please don't quote me, but they're going to say, let's have 2 in-person meetings in Yavapai Hills. Let's do it at the same time as maybe one homeowners association and a separate event. Then they're going to say, we want to do an active online campaign with a website and social media. But each consultant's going to come back with a much more specific proposal and a way of approaching this. Based upon that submittal, this body, the TAC and staff, will review it and be able to say, look, this is the consulting group that clearly understands the issues related to this project and will be the best consultant to carry that out. So just want to give the public a heads up as you look at this. If you don't see it where it's maybe completely spelled out to your satisfaction, it's a little bit of this process that we enter into, and we look for the best qualifications and consultant to help us to carry that out. So, and then I think one more comment came on if I noticed it. Ann was saying the ranch at Prescott Unit 9 is also affected. Thank you for letting us know that. And is it possible to get a copy of the DCR draft exhibit? Absolutely, Ann. We'll be happy to share that with you. And then, Mr. Chair, members of the TAC, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. And I'm happy to continue taking questions or comments from you as a TAC or the public.
Okay, thank you, Vinny. And with that, if they're happy to open it up for any other discussion or even a possible motion if someone's ready for a motion. Yeah, so I think the choice here, Vinny, if I've got it right, is Motion would be, the suggested motion from staff is to recommend approval of the scope of work for the Sundog Connector DCR report, environmental overview.
That's correct. I guess to cover the bases, Mr. Chair, is that, again, staff has presented both the design concept report and environmental overview, and also the corridor planning study, which Daniel went through for both of those. So those were presented to you for your technical review if you had any additional questions or comments. So you are reviewing both of them, but as I'm hearing the discussion, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought Member Cherry and Mattingly and maybe some others, while reviewing both of them, we're definitely recommending the design concept report as I was hearing the discussion. But just to be clear, you have technically reviewed both as possible options, but it's your recommendation for the Sundog Connector design concept report for the board to understand your position. So.
And I haven't made my comment known, but just personally, I tend to agree that if the executive board wishes to move forward, I'm not sure a corridor study would provide any more information at this point. I would probably also, if the board wants to move forward at all, I would probably recommend going the DCR route as well. Maybe that's my bias as an engineer. I like to see the numbers and cost estimates, but I think it provides a much better picture for further planning and funding sources. I don't want to speak for Norm, but I will say, I've heard him say it before, you know, we need to have items ready to go, especially in this age of a lot of federal money starting to come our way. So if the executive board wishes to move forward, getting some of those 15% plans together, taking out preferences for individual projects, just that in general, we need to start getting our ducks in a row for some projects to be able to compete. So.
Yes, it's difficult to write a grant if you don't know the, parameters for what you're asking for. If you're just throwing things at a wall and hoping something sticks, it's very difficult to put together an adequate grant application for federal dollars if that's the desire.
Okay.
And I will say, I think that we're looking at this from a logical standpoint as how best to spend the dollars that CYMPO has available to spend on something like this. But we all recognize this is a highly political and politicized project here, and I can't stress enough that the public involvement phase of this, as has been touched on already, is very important. And I think we may even want to consider during the process of selecting a consultant, is having these discussions with the finalists or even the finalist about whether we want to beef that up even further. But we recognize this. I know that our elected officials that we all answer to and sit on our board, that they are they're looking to us for technical advice. And the best technical advice I can give right now is, if you're going to spend dollars, spend them in a way that's productive. And in my opinion, the corridor planning study is not nearly as productive as a DCR. So with that, I'd be happy to make a motion. I will make a motion to recommend approval to the executive board that the scope of work for the Sundog Connector design concept report, environmental overview be approved.
I second that. It's Ian from the City of Prescott.
I have a motion by Member Cherry and a second from Member Mattingly. Any other?
Mr. Chair, can I make one more comment before you call for your final vote?
Sure.
Just again to add, and I know that the TAC knows this, but as Dan referenced, definitely generating a lot of engagement now in the community. And again, we want to continue that engagement. Just one thing maybe we neglected to hit on, or I neglected to hit on, was, there is a great deal of discussion about State Route 69 corridor and the work that needs to be done there. Just want to remind you as a TAC and the public, that is our intent as soon as we can issue out this request for quotes and get a consultant on board is our number 2 project is the State Route 69 Master Corridor Plan, which again would run from State Route 89 in the city of Prescott and 69 intersection, and it would go all the way to the 169 intersection out at the end of Prescott Valley, Dewey, Humboldt. So I know a lot of the public has already sent in some comments previously about our focus really needs to be on there. And a somewhat of a simple answer as it is, we're going to do both at the same time, if you will. The 69 Master Corridor Planning Study will be taking place while the Sundog Connector is taking place. I can't say it'll work out perfectly timeline wise, but I would like to think when both are done that the decision makers, including you and elected officials, will have the information for both, and they'll have that in front of them to be able to look at what are the options for 69, what are the options for Sundog Connector, given all the community engagement, given the opportunity for funds. So I just want to remind that we're not at all ignoring and neglecting 69. We're aware of the congestion and capacity issues and safety issues, and we are looking at that. So we'll be doing these 2 major projects pretty simultaneously, if you will, so that we can make the best informed decisions moving forward. So sorry about that, Mr. Chair, but I thought that was important.
Yeah, I
Thank
think.
you for those comments.
Go
ahead, Dan.
We have funding in 2 separate fiscal years to start each project, so that's why they're not starting in the same year, correct, Vinny?
Yes, I would say that's one answer. The other answer is just staffing capacity.
Sure.
CYMPO's a small staff of 4 people, so. But yes, it starts with the funding available in the 2 separate years. And then the other part is just our capacity to carry out 2 major planning studies in addition to all the other activities that we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? So just a reminder, this motion is to approve the scope of work for the Sundog Connector DCR report and environmental review. So I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? See, that motion carries. We'll move on to item 7, review and discussion and possible action to recommend approval of the request for qualifications, or RFQ, for the Sundog Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview. I'll just finish reading. Or request for proposals, RFP, for the Sundog Connector Corridor Planning Study. I am assuming, based on the vote from the last item, they'll just be considering the request for qualifications for the DCR.
I'll make a motion to follow along the same footsteps that we recommend to the executive board approval of the request for qualifications, the RFQ, for the Sundog Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview. Just to get a motion out there and hopefully a second, and then we can have discussion if necessary.
Yeah, I second that. Ian, City of Prescott.
Motion by member Cherry and a second by member Mattingly. Any discussion or questions? Go ahead and open it up.
I have a thing for discussion, Frank.
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead,
So
Dana.
two things. So we don't have the full RFQ prepared. We currently have a template being created for CYMPO use, either what's going to be for this project, and then future RFQs as well. Two things that CYMPO did want to share today was the RFQ review criteria and then the estimated RFQ schedule. So I'm going to go and share my screen. So this is what CYMPO staff has created for the review criteria for the RFQ. We just wanted to run it by the technical committee and see if you had any questions or comments, or if this kind of seems like a good place to go with the scoring criteria.
No comments or objections for me. It looks pretty standard for a criteria for a RFQ.
Then I'll
Can
quickly-
you zoom in a little bit on that?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm not hearing any questions or objections to that criteria, Daniel.
And the second thing I'm gonna run through real quick is the estimated schedule. So right now, if everything moves forward as planned after the board meeting, we would advertise your request for qualifications on December 17th. We would receive the statements of qualifications in January 21st. February 3rd, we would have a TAC working group to review the submittals and select the top 3 candidates, which would then be followed by cost negotiation with those top 3 selected firms, beginning with number 1 and moving forward if needed. After that, we would have TAC recommended approval of selected firm, board approval, our Yavapai County Board of Supervisors approval because they're our CYMPO fiscal agent. And then in April, we'll be looking to fully execute the contract and give a notice to proceed.
Am I
Okay,
correct? Am I correct that we have the option of some interviews with the top 3 if necessary?
Yes, if necessary, we can do interviews as well. Might change the timeline a little bit, but yes.
Of course.
So my question is, on the February 3rd date, would that coincide with the monthly TAC meeting? Be part of it, or?
I believe the working group would be before the TAC meeting.
Okay. All right, and if there's, so would there be, part of the TAC meeting would be to have a short list of the top 3? Does that need an official vote, or just maybe asking too many questions right now? But
That would be on the normal agenda, most likely, yes.
Okay. Great.
Hi, this is
That's all I
Verna Bond.
have.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Verna Bondoc from ADOT. That February 3rd and February 7th, that might be a little bit tight because it's my understanding that you cannot negotiate with all 3 for the fee at the same time. So you would have to select a consultant and then go directly into fee negotiations based on that selected consultant's proposal.
Correct. And we will have, so with the scoring process, we'll have a top number 1, number 2, and number 3. So the February 7th would be beginning those negotiations with the selected, which would be the top rank for number 1.
Right, but what I'm saying is you cannot have a fee negotiation with all 3 because then you're forcing them to compete with each other. So, which makes sense. However, what I'm saying is in order to have a actual final fee negotiation, that final selected consultant would have to have been notified that they were selected already.
Okay.
Before you can go into the actual final fee negotiation. So it would be, at that point, you would be requesting a best and final offer. So that February 3rd and 7th is not enough time for them to get notification and then come up with a proposal, a fee proposal at the same time.
Okay. We'll look into that and adjust our schedule. Thank you, Myrna.
You're welcome.
Right, and just to maybe clarify, what I'm used to is when we select the top three, those are ranked in order. And here in Chino, what we do is we begin negotiations with the top ranked firm. If those fall through, we end the negotiations and then begin with the second ranked firm. So we're only negotiating with one at a time.
And I think that's what we were looking into as well, but we might need to adjust that schedule just a little bit.
That'd be fine. So, any other comments or questions?
I've touched on it a little already, but with a contract probably not coming into consideration by the executive board until April at the earliest, and sounds like things may slide a little here. I'm hoping we have some feedback from our state legislators about this rural transportation one-time funding that is being considered, or we're being told will be considered. So maybe at that time we can also consider whether we might tap the brakes ever so slightly and consider that funding for a contract in a month or two after or something like that. So just keep it in mind, please. I don't think we should hold up this process based on whether the funding would come from CYMPO's regular federal routed funds or that one-time funding, but I do think there could be benefit there. So that also might help be a little easier sell for our executive board if there's less risk.
Right, and I'm taking, Dan, your comment on that might be that may or may not affect that 10-year clock for federal funding, depending on the source.
That is correct. And if we did that, we of course would have to figure where we would put the federal funding in place as well. Obviously, we're already earmarking the next round of that for 69 master corridor study, but that can be a topic for future discussion with the TAC, in my opinion. Again, I'm trying not to count my chickens on that one-time funding.
You never know, but it's. I was listening in on Kevin Adam yesterday, and he seemed hopeful. So
yeah,
with the RTAC. So all right. So I think we still have a motion on the table to recommend advertisement for the request for qualifications for the DCR. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. I think that gives you what you need, Vinny, to move forward with that one to the executive board and get their input.
It does, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So we'll move on to item 8, review, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval to amend the FY 2022-2023 Unified Planning Work Program, my favorite acronym, the UPWOP.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the TAC. And then I'm going to call on, I guess Daniel will bring it up, but then Allison, if you would help me out on both of the work program and the TIP, and we can there's just a couple minor changes, and I'd like to classify it, some of it mostly as housekeeping activities, but Allison, if you would walk us through on what you have highlighted in the work program briefly, that would be a big help.
Sure. Daniel, if you scroll down one page, we are updating our FY21 carry forwards as requested by ADOT and FHWA. We had originally listed amounts that needed to be reprogrammed, but they have requested that we list the amounts, whether programmed or not. So the full amounts being carried over from FY21. So that's what you see on this page. The pages beyond this, we are moving STBG funding from our admin operating task to the regional planning projects task for the Sundog connector, as STBG funding is an allowable fund for this project, and the SPR funding that we had originally programmed is not. So we're just swapping the funds between those two tasks. And essentially all of these budget tables in the work program are just reflecting that transfer of funds. So if you scroll all the way down, Daniel, all the highlights are just swapping the funds. So we would just need to process this amendment in order to move those funds.
So, Mr. Chair, Allison and I are happy to take any questions or comments, but as you see, it's primarily some housekeeping. It's the ultimate goal is to fund the planning study that we've talked about today. So that's been prioritized, that's done. It's just maybe a little bit behind the scenes as to which funds are allowed. CYMPO uses a variety of pots of funding. So on any given planning project, we may use a certain percentage of one fund over another, depending on the match or the allowed use of that. So happy to take questions or comments.
Open it up for questions or motions. All right. I'll go ahead and make a motion to recommend the executive board approve amending the FY 22-23 CYMPO Unified Planning Work Program.
I'll second
Do I
that
have
for
a
you,
second?
Chair.
Sorry, I think I talked over you, Dan.
Just providing you a second to your motion, Chair.
Thank you. So my motion and Dan's second. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item 9, review, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval to amend the FY 22 through 26 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, the MTIP. Back to you, Vinny.
Mr. Chair, members of the TAC, so essentially two items on this. I think I might have it, Allison, but I'll let you chime in if I miss something. So again, a little bit of housekeeping. One of the items, again, deals with what Allison was just referring to. The funds, some of the funds that we had identified for the Sundog Connector project, and again, the allowed use between our SPR funds and our STBG funds. So again, making that reflective. And then the other item that you have in your packet is as it relates to Prescott Valley Transit that's moving forward. They're using federal funds in the future. So again, those need to be noted and documented in our MTIP. So there is a letter from the transit manager, Pedro Rodriguez, outlining the changes that are requested. With that said, they are reflected now in the yellow highlights in the tip in your attachments. And Allison, did I miss anything on that, or was that it?
You got it.
All right. So happy to take any questions or comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions or comments? All right. I'll go ahead and make a motion to recommend the executive board approve amending the 2022 through 2026 CYMPO Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program changes as amended, as presented.
Second.
Second from Member Cherry. Any other questions? Have a vote. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries. So we're on to item 10, my favorite one. So we'll have meeting. We'll adjourn it. So
Make a motion to adjourn.
oh, okay. Yeah, we can do a motion. I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Right.
All right. Thanks,
Any
everyone.
opposed? We are adjourned, Vinny.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all. I
everybody.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day now.
Vinny, I will be on the executive board meeting. That's my plan. So if there needs to be further discussion at that time, so.
That'll be a big help. I always appreciate the TAC that's able to join. That's a big help. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
All right, and